Today on Christian World News, helping the Japanese people survive multiple disasters. Our Christian organizations on the front lines of relief efforts. And
against us or complete lies, and they entice their own people and try to bring others against us.
A surprising source of Christian persecution inside the Holy Land and the faith it's building among believers there. Plus, prayers from a prison camp, how Christians locked up in the former Soviet Gulag are changing their country more than 50 years after their deaths. Earthquake, tsunami, now nuclear crisis. The Japanese people struggle to overcome multiple disasters. Hello everyone, I'm George Thomas and welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. Well, more than 500,000 Japanese are now homeless because of the quake and tsunami. Many are struggling to survive with no power and no heat in freezing winter weather. And if that weren't bad enough, relief work is hampered by the nuclear crisis. People are hoarding food and gas, and travel to the quake zone has become more and more hazardous as the risk of nuclear contamination increases. Despite the risk of radiation exposure, some aid groups are at work in the region, including CBN's Operation Blessing. David Darg has this report from the quake zone.
We've made it as far as this town, Rikuzen Takada. We're on the coast of the Iwate Prefecture, and this is the second day in a row that Operation Blessing has been able to deliver essential relief supplies to some of the hardest hit areas here in Japan. We're in an auditorium, a huge auditorium here in the town, where most of the residents have fled to. There are about 1,000 people sleeping here, living here now. Their homes have been completely destroyed, and those are the homes that we're seeing obliterated, washed up just like matchsticks in piles of debris. And Operation Blessing has bought bags and bags of rice here. We've unloaded it into the kitchen, and they're extremely happy, and they're telling us this is the first rice we've got. We've been without rice, we need it. The rice has been a huge blessing today, and we're privileged to be serving this town in its hour of greatest need. This building is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. The water got all the way to the top. It's maybe 80 feet tall. And one of the residents told us that people were plucked from the top of that building by helicopters, rescued from there, and that they were waist deep in water on the top of the building. So you just get a sense of how high the wall of water was and how powerful too, that it would rip right through the building. And it's gone all the way up the valley as far as you can see, pretty much in every direction as far as you look. It's just complete and utter destruction. All of the wood is from the houses. You know, they built their houses here out of wood to make them earthquake-proof, and they all survived the earthquake, but did not survive the tsunami.
That's our David Darg reporting for Operation Blessing. Outstanding work, David. Well, Japan's Christian community is mobilizing to respond to this crisis, but they are only 1% of the entire population. Recently, I spoke with Ken Joseph of the Japan Emergency Team, a Christian relief agency at work in Sendai. He says all those disasters add up to the worst catastrophe he's ever seen, and he's begging the international community to respond.
This is our 85th project, but we've never been to anything like this before, where you have an earthquake, then you had a fire, then you had snow, and then a tsunami, and then this nuclear situation after it. We're about 90 kilometers from the area, and they're recommending everyone leave within 80 kilometers.
Is relief getting in? I mean, I was reading a report today that many aid agencies are holding back on providing supplies because of the concern over the radiation.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing that the worst possible thing that could happen is be at this time when we were over yesterday at a church. In the worst hit area. We found a guy we've been looking for about 5 or 6 days, but we got to this church that we haven't been able to reach, and there was a pastor and his wife just freezing without anything at all. So what's really concerning us now is that with this concern about the nuclear situation, the little help that we've been getting will be cut off completely.
How are the churches responding? How are they dealing with this crisis? How obviously they're also part of the devastation.
They're working together really hard. We meet every day, usually once or twice a day. to compile, which churches need to be visited, which refugee centers need to be helped. We went out yesterday. Different teams have been going out, and we've pretty much been able to get in touch with all of the churches so that there's nobody that is unaccountable for at this point. But a good example was the church we were at yesterday. Out of 30 people in the church, only 5 have been located, and it's a week after the earthquake. So the situation is it's beyond the control of the people here. There's a lot of concern because right off, not too far from where we are, an American carrier showed up with, I think, 2 or 3 other ships, and we're not seeing any of that help. So I hate to be, over the top, but I mean it's really, really, really bad. We were just at the gas station trying to fill up, and they told us that they didn't have enough gas for the police cars, let alone us. And so it's a pretty desperate situation, and the worst possible thing would be for the world to pull back now because of this concern about the nuclear situation.
Do you see, in the midst of all of this, the chaos, do you see God's hand at work?
In 1597, there was a terrible earthquake in the city of Kyoto, and it caused one of the greatest revivals in Japan history, to the point that within 3 years, nearly 1/3 of the Japanese population were Christians. So, as terrible as things are, this could very well be what we've all prayed for so long, that there'll be a revival in Japan that will turn it around and bring it back to where it once was.
You talked about this would not be the right time for the international community to pull back. Obviously, the concerns over the radiation is very, very serious. How can the global Christian community help? In the midst of all the challenges you guys are facing, how can the global community help the Christian community?
First of all, they should really pray especially for this government. It's a new government. Is not had experience in power, and it's not very good in these kinds of situations. Pray specifically for the government, and secondly, pray for the church that it'll be able to rise up to the challenge. But third, the church needs to help. They need to, instead of being afraid to come, we urgently need them to come and help specifically with the needs from food to clothing to just taking care of these basic needs, and also to urge their governments to do so. I mean, if Christians could speak to their governments, please, this is not the time to pull back from helping.
And to find out how you can partner with groups helping relief victims, including Operation Blessing, just go to our website at cwnews.org. Some sad news to report. We've learned that a missionary from Quebec, Canada, is among the quake victims. Andrea Lapacelli was a member of the Society of Foreign Missionaries. The 76-year-old was about 15 miles from the coastal community where he served when the quake hit. He immediately left to reach them, even though his colleagues urged him not to go. The tsunami hit him just as he arrived. Lapacelli's body was found outside of his car. Medical examiners have determined that he suffered from a heart attack. Well, coming up, Messianic Jews facing persecution in Israel.
I have Yeshua as the master of this house, and I know that our house is surrounded by angels.
Strength and resolve in the face of an unlikely foe. Their uprising's inspiring story rather still ahead on Christian World News.
CWNews.org, your constant news source on the World Wide Web. Find daily updates on the global church. Watch the weekly broadcast.
3 former presidents come together to honor the life and ministry.
Also available in podcast. Read in-depth insights into our reporter blogs.
Taliban kidnapped at least 18 South Korean Christians.
Your online news source for complete coverage of the global church.
I want to talk to you for a few minutes about what may be God's best for you.
In the new DVD, The Law of Expectation from Pat and Gordon Robertson, Pat shares the essential truth that enables you to receive the favor of God.
God knows who you are. He knows everything about you. And God says, I love you, and here's what I'm going to do for you.
Pat and Gordon Robertson bring you powerful principles of thought and behavior that can transform your life. Experience the joy of realizing your dreams, the power of finding purpose in your life, and the fulfillment that comes from building a deeper relationship with God.
life. You'll see prosperity in your life. You'll see blessing in your life. Why? Because of God's favor.
Get the law of expectation and experience the wonderful blessing God has for you. Available now.
And I realized God was saying, look, you can keep doing this your way or you can do it my way. Your way, you got what you got. My way, I can work this out in such a way that it will astonish you. And so I remember saying, look, here's what's left of my life. You can have it. You can trust the Lord and He will do His work in your life, and you will be so glad that He did.
A Christian house church leader has been freed from a Chinese prison. China Aid reports that Christian publisher Shi Weihan was released last month, nearly 3 years after his arrest. She distributed Bibles and other Christian literature. He was convicted and imprisoned for conducting an, quote, illegal business operation. She is now at home with his wife and 2 children, but government agents are closely monitoring his activities. The government of Malaysia will release 35,000 Malay language Bibles held up for 2 years by customs officials. Authorities blocked distribution of these scriptures because they used the word Allah for God. Last year, a court ruling gave Christians the right to use the word Allah in their printed materials, but the government is challenging that ruling because they say it will be confusing for Muslims. The Bibles will be stamped for Christians only to prevent anyone from trying to convert Muslims. And for the last 7 years, a Messianic Jewish community in southern Israel has been harassed and persecuted. The people doing it? Ultra-Orthodox Jews. And despite almost daily opposition, the believers are persevering in the faith. My colleague Chris Mitchell recently visited the city of Arad to see how they're holding up.
Some 200 Orthodox protesters demonstrated outside the home of a Messianic Jew and against the 100 or so members of the Messianic community in Arad, accusing them of missionary activity. Organized by the aggressive anti-missionary group Yad Lakim, their message was clear.
We hope that after we will be here and demonstrate and really speak from the heart, we won't need to return again for demonstrations, because simply the Messianic Jews, as they call themselves, will be erased from Arad.
Yakim Figueros is pastor of one of the 4 congregations in Arad, a desert town of some 25,000 mostly secular residents. They have endured sometimes daily cursing and harassment by religious Jews outside their homes for years.
They come with either half-truths against us or complete lies, and they entice their own people and try to bring others against us.
Protesters often focus on Polly Sigulim, a widow and foster mother. Her own sons are now grown and serve in elite Israeli army units.
Polly's house is one of their focuses in town, because one of the lies that were spread against us was that we kidnap innocent children, Jewish children, and baptize them into Christianity.
Sigulim says she can withstand the persecution because she isn't alone.
We have a very strong community here. The other thing was, I'm not worried because I have the Heavenly Father, I have Yeshua as the master of this house, and I know that our house is surrounded by angels.
Police say their hands are tied and they're forced to allow the demonstrations to take place. During the protest, a rabbi accused the believers of trying to destroy the Jewish people. Protest signs compare the believers to Hamas, saying Hamas wants our land while the Messianics want our souls. Some Arad residents are fed up with the protests. About 25 secular Arad residents showed up for a counter-protest. They accused the demonstrators of racism, and many were concerned about how the protest would reflect on their city and country. But Sigulim and other believers were not at home. They gathered to pray during the protest for the demonstrators and their community.
Bless them, Lord Father. Pour your Spirit out on them.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Arad.
An Al-Qaeda terrorist has been sentenced to death for the murder of an American teacher in West Africa. Gunmen killed Christopher Leggett in the capital of Mauritania, not far from the school he helped run. They said he was trying to convert Muslims. The court convicted 3 men of the crime, but only the plotter received the death sentence. Coming up,
I believe that God's kingdom will reach the far corners of this difficult land for which our grandfathers shed their blood and prayed a long time ago for.
the incredible story of Russian Christians held in the Soviet Gulag and how their prayers are being answered more than 50 years after their deaths.
We asked CBN.com users how we could make our website easier to use, and we listened.
This is really easy to read and move through.
The information opens up a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, it's much faster. There's everything I'm interested in right here. The click of a mouse.
The new CBN.com has been redesigned, making it faster to find your favorite 700 Club stories, musical guests, our online community, and special features.
Anyone can enjoy this new site.
Visit the new CBN.com today.
Hi, I'm Gordon Robertson. Jesus told us that if we have faith, we can speak to the mountain and it will move. Are there mountains in your life that you're currently facing? How do you break through the limits of your faith and see the miracles God has promised you in His Word? My father and I have put together a special teaching, The Law of Expectation. In it, you'll discover how to train your heart and mind to expect great things.
In this latest DVD, The Law of Expectation, Pat and Gordon Robertson bring you powerful principles of thought and behavior that can transform your life. You'll discover the power of expectations in your life, how to break through the limits of your faith, and what it means to agree with God and receive His favor and abundance.
Get the Law of Expectation and learn to expect and experience the wonderful blessings God has for you.
I was always on the cusp of exploding. So I figured out if I get rid of the wife and the kids, then I can just send them money. Went to the junk drawer, I got the Bible out, put the tape in, and I believe that moment, Christ made sense. There is no earthly reason why we're still married. It is a divine intervention, and I thank God, and showing me what love, grace, and forgiveness looks like.
In 1949, tens of thousands of Russian political prisoners were ordered to a Siberian labor camp to build a railway. Many, they died. They died trying to finish it. Now a Russian pastor is honoring their memory by starting a church on the very spot that housed many of the prisoners.
In 1949, Stalin has reason to believe his place in Soviet history is secure.
The railway was the project of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin.
Stalin's plan was to join the eastern and western parts of Russia. The railway started in Salikard and ended in Igarka. Thousands of political prisoners were sent here to Salikard to work on it.
Among them, Anatoly Marachev's grandfather.
My grandfather was labeled an enemy of the state. He was against Stalin's policies and sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp in Salikard.
1,200 miles northeast of Moscow, Salikard is the only town in the world that's on the Arctic Circle. Temperatures here often plummet to minus 60 degrees. So it was an ideal place to stash away Stalin's political enemies.
Most of the labor camps were located in the isolated regions of the Arctic, and soon those who began to work on the railway faced these harsh conditions.
Blizzard-like conditions in the winter, millions of mosquitoes, gnats, and parasites in the summer.
After almost 30 years of unparalleled power, Joseph Stalin dies at 74.
Construction on the railway eventually stopped in 1953 after Stalin's death, but the damage was already done. Marachev's grandfather died, along with tens of thousands of other political prisoners.
People call this the railroad of death because many could not handle the cold and the bugs.
Historical records show Christians were also killed in the Salikard gulags.
We have eyewitness accounts of secret prayer gatherings, Germans from Volga region, Russian Christians from the Caucasus and elsewhere. They prayed for this harsh region.
Several years ago, Anatoly Marachev moved with his family to Salikart to honor the memory of his grandfather and the countless who died in the Siberian labor camps.
These prisoners prayed that one day the gospel will reach the peoples of this land. Today, we are seeing the fruits of their prayers.
And the fruit is the Good News Church, a thriving evangelical congregation that has risen in the heart of the Siberian tundra, led by Pastor Marachev.
People are turning to the Lord all over this region. Families are being healed, people delivered from alcohol and drugs.
And the location of Pastor Anatoly's church is very significant. You see, back in the early 50s, this exact spot used to hold thousands of political as well as religious prisoners in labor camps.
To have a spiritual center, a house of worship, in this location is not just symbolic, but also strategic.
In partnership with the Association for Spiritual Renewal, which focuses on bringing the gospel to the former Soviet Union, Pastor Marachev uses his church to train the next generation of Christian leaders. Mikhailo Chernikov oversees the program.
We have a program called Schools Without Walls that's preparing young men and women to go into full-time ministry. We equip, disciple, then send out prospective leaders to reach these remote communities in Siberia and around Russia.
Good News Church is also training young people like 25-year-old Marina Shevchenko from neighboring Ukraine to be effective missionaries.
My heart is to share the gospel with the nomadic tribes. Before I can do that, I have to understand their culture. That's where Good News Church comes in. They've been working with these tribes for years.
And speaking of remote tribes, when he's not busy leading his flock, you'll find Pastor Marachev driving across the Russian tundra to reach nomadic villages with the gospel.
This is the one time in the entire year that you can actually get to this remote part of the Siberian tundra, because what we are on right now is a huge frozen lake.
It took us 4 hours today to travel less than 60 kilometers, but it was worth it. These tribes were once forgotten, not anymore.
Members of his church take regular trips to deliver food, clothes, and medical supplies. On this particular trek, Pastor Marachev will share communion with a nomadic family that he recently introduced to Jesus Christ.
I'm so happy today. We are the only Christians in this village. To take part in communion with other believers is very special for my family.
Back in Salikart, home to some 40,000 people, Marachev is extending the church's influence to minister to orphans, the homeless, and those living with HIV/AIDS. He says this is all part of the desire to continue the legacy of those who came before him, enduring hardship and persecution, to see the gospel preached in Siberia and beyond.
That's what I stand on, those prayers of the prisoners. I believe that God's kingdom will reach the far corners of this difficult land for which our grandfathers shed their blood and prayed a long time ago for.
You can see more of my reports from Russia and other stories about the work of the church around the world at our website. Just log on to cwnews.org. We'll be back right after this.
Let Superbook take your kids on an amazing adventure. Back to the beginning of time.
Then God said, "Let there be light."
Come explore with Chris.
Anything I can do to help?
Joy.
Where are we?
And Gizmo.
I am too scared to look.
As they experience the wonder of creation.
We call this Eden.
Encounter temptation.
Chris, do not do it!
And learn important truths from the Bible. For your gift of $25 or more, you'll receive a special edition of Superbook's newest DVD, In the Beginning, Superbook trading cards, and help fund future Superbook episodes.
It's amazing.
Give the kids you love a gift they'll watch over and over. Superbook. It's superpower for super kids.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy.
How many nickels are in $1?
there are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Christian World News, your window to the global church. For stories of revival.
Another revival.
Persecution.
Funeral, relatives and fellow Christians mourn his.
The first country over the international date line.
I'm George Thomas in Baghdad, and coming up on the broadcast, an exclusive interview.
And the impact of Christian leaders. Watch Christian World News.
And welcome back to the broadcast. You know, almost daily, news anchors read stories of great human tragedy, though we rarely provide commentary. Some stories, well, they compel us to speak from our Christian worldview. CBN News senior anchor Lee Webb is here with me right now to talk about the events in Japan and the response from a Christian biblical perspective of, was God in the middle of this disaster?
And it's a great question that we all should ask. Not all that long ago, natural disasters like the one in Japan were called acts of God. You don't hear that expression much anymore. Sadly, many Christians are uncomfortable saying that a loving God would allow such terrible destruction and pain. We don't object to describing God as sovereign, but are we willing to embrace all that the word sovereign implies? The fact is that Scripture is filled with examples of God's sovereign power over nature. The Psalms declare that the ocean depths, lightning and hail, snow and clouds, stormy winds do His bidding. We should never pretend to know why God does such things, but we can be assured of how He wants us to respond. The Bible tells us to mourn with those who mourn and to supply all the comfort and relief that Jesus provided to the hungry, the sick, and the afflicted. That's what motivates CBN's Operation Blessing to do what it does in times of disaster, to be the closest thing to Jesus that some folks may ever see. Yes, God is sovereign. That means He's not wringing His hands over what's happening in Japan or any place else on this earth. He did not speak the world into existence only to let it spin out of control. God, you see, superintends every atom on this planet and beyond, and He knows every hair on our heads, the Scriptures tell us. But the same God who is awesome in power is also amazing in His grace. He's a God who likes to take things that are broken, and make them better once again. That's why those who have bent their knee to this Almighty King can also call Him our friend and Redeemer.
Lee, I know that there's this example in Job that we're all familiar with in Job chapter 1. Job goes through a horrendous period in his life.
He loses everything.
He loses everything. The devil was in essence accused of bringing that kind of destruction.
Right. It's obvious that the devil had a part in that, but it's clear too that this sovereign God set the parameters for Satan to follow. He could do this, but not anymore. And I think God used it to demonstrate His power. Only God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent.
Okay, terrific. Well, that's all for this week's edition of Christian World News. We'll see you back next week.